we're getting close to the end. In this part, we're going to start laying the tracks over the bridge here. I've already done one side, so why don't we get started, and I'll show you how I did the first set of rails. Okay, so what I have is a long piece of flex track here. I believe it's 30 inches, but it's a little short to fit from the two ends here to piece in. So what I had to do was I had to come back and I had to fit on, and it's soldered here, another piece of flex track to make it longer to make up the difference. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this soldered point and I'm going to put it up at this end because that's all straight, and then we're going to start marking off where we're going to remove the ties. I mean, it would be easy just to put this in here like this and glue it down like that, but it looks better if we do it the other way. The wooden ties in here actually make the railroad ties. So we're gonna make that work like that. Okay, so I've got a black marker and we're gonna remove. I'm just gonna draw on this one and we're gonna remove all the way up to this one. Okay, so now we're gonna mark this section. We're gonna take off from this tie here all the way back to this tie right here. Alright, so now we're going to come back over here. I'm going to line these rails up right here where it's going to hook up. I'm going to pull this back into place where it's got to go, and then I'm just going to mark off. I'm going to cut off this tie all the way back to this tie. Okay, so now we have 3 sections of ties that we have to pull out of here. See, now when we put this back in, this will lay right across there and we can solder this right there. So I'm going to go back and we're going to remove all the rest of the sections that we marked off. So now what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to glue these tied sections, the sections with the ties here, to the road bed. Okay, and then we're going to let that sit for a little while and let that harden up. And we're going to start here and we're going to work our way down. And what we're going to do is I'm going to use a little caulk. I use this stuff. It works good. I usually use gray. This is just what I have, so that's what I'm going to use. And I'm going to put a little bit on. We just need a thin coat underneath here. You want only a thin layer of this because you don't want it to squeeze all up between the tracks, because you want to ballast this at some point. But you also want to make sure that there's enough to hold it down. See, we got a little bit right there. Okay. I'm going to push this down here like that. I'm going to slide this right in so that I want to make sure that the approach to the bridge over at this side is centered up with the bridge. And we want to twist this a little bit back so that this end is centered up on our copper. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put some weights on that to hold it down. And we're going to let that sit for a couple hours and let that caulk really have a chance to grab. Alright, so here we go. These are all dried up now. It's been probably a couple of hours. And we're going to take these off. And this should all be pretty well dried up. Yeah, see, those are good and strong in there. Okay. Now we're going to move on to the next area here, which is going to be over in the wood bridge. Okay, so now we're going to take this track here and we're going to glue this directly to the wood. But we need to make sure, because we don't have the railroad ties, these plastic ties here, these ties any longer, we have to make sure that that stays in gauge. So I have this. This is a Microtrains track gauge. because it's a long length. So what we're going to do is we'll fit this on here, and it'll sit on both the tracks, and it'll keep them at the right gauge, like this. And then we'll fit this across, and we can slide it across to make sure that the rails stay where they're supposed to be, so that the trains will have no troubles running over it. So we're going to use some CA glue, and we're going to glue that right to the wood. I'm using the medium glue because it gives me a little bit of working time, and that's kind of what I need to get these in. I don't want it to dry too fast because I need time to be able to get this positioned. So now what we're going to do is we're going to lay this down. I want to center it up like that, and I want to take this and just run it down there like this. So right there is where we need it. That passes nicely through. So you just want to make sure that that's going to stay before we go any further. So I'm going to let this dry probably a good 5 minutes or so. I want to make sure that this isn't going to come up when I start working this other part of the rail. Okay, so we're back. This is dried now. Now we can go ahead and glue this section down. So the first thing we have to do is we have to cut the rails to length. So this is going to go just like this, and we want to snip off the rails. Now when you're using these, there's a flat side and an angled side. I put the flat side to the side that's to the good side. So now we have to cut back a couple of ties off the end of this so that we can get the rail joiners in. Okay, so those are good and tight now. Sure we're good. And this will go in just like this. Alright. So now, like we did this other section, we'll put the caulking down in here, we'll weight it down, and then we'll let that sit until tomorrow, and then we'll come back and we'll continue along. Alright. So this has had a chance to dry. I'm going to take the weights off now. They should be good under there. Let's see. Yeah, that's pretty good. So now we can solder these joints here. I kind of want to put this on here too so that we keep this at the right gauge. Alright, those are done. Alright, now if we did this right, this should all just drop right down. Just like that. And then we have soldered rails. All our stuff is in. And this all works and it all lines up perfectly. We have to separate the two sides of the rail here. If we don't, this is a huge short circuit because these two rails are tied together on a copper plate. So we have to break that tie So all I'm going to do is I have a small grinding wheel, and I'm just going to run a line right through here. I'm not going to cut through the circuit board, I'm just going to break the copper. So there we go. Now our sides are isolated. We're all isolated. Everything should be good at this point. Okay, so what I've done is, like I said before, I have the code 40 rails here. And after I cut this first one to length here and bent in the edges, I went and cut two more for this side the same length. And then what I did was I measured back, or measured and didn't really measure, but I counted rails or ties. I went 4 back, 1, 2, 3, 4. I marked this tie, and I did the same for the other side here, and I put a mark. That's where these rails are going to center up to. So I'm going to put this down with some CA glue, and I'm just going to put this out a little bit, and we'll glue that down with CA, and then we'll move from there. So let's get those on. Okay. So we're going to line this right to our tie here. And just keep the space even all the way across. Alright, so now we have both of these in. Okay, and we're going to let that sit for a few minutes. Okay, so this is sat now for a little bit. I just bent this one just to make sure it was dried enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back 2 ties. I'm going to grab it with the needle nose pliers here. We go one, so we go right to here, and we're just going to grab it. I know it's hard to see, but grab it with the pliers here, and we're just going to give it a bend in like that. And I'm going to grab the other one and bend it in like that, and then we end up with that, with the bend in here. And then we'll take a little CA glue again and just run that right in here like this, and that'll hold all that in place. And I know this is a little shiny with the glue on, but that's okay, because we're going to paint the track work railroad tie brown. I'm going to come back with the airbrush. We're going to spray all of this, and none of that will even show. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to fill in these gaps right here where we cut out the ties. I've already done it over here, and you can't really tell where it is. The only way you can see is because the ties vary in color. This has already been painted, this has not. And I filled in all the ties all the way up to the plates here. So that outer rail is now complete. So you can see how that looks all the way down. And there are no gaps in the ties. So we're going to do the same thing on this other side. And it's very easy to do. This is where the ties that we cut off, and I had said earlier on the last video that we want to keep those because they do have a purpose. This is the purpose. Okay, so here's what we do. These are ties that we cut off the last, when we laid in the rails. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay this up here close, and I'm just going to count out how many ties we need. So you need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 ties, looks like. We'll go back to 5, and I'm going to break off 5 ties from here. So now you have this 5 tie thing. So we can lay it on top and see that that'll pretty much fill that space just right. So what we need to do with this, because this needs to slide under, is we need to cut off the tie plates right here. To look like the bolts that hold the rails down. We need to cut those off. So I'm going to come with the knife over here, and we're just going to cut those off. And then on the ends here and here, I want to nip off the little tips of the rails that are sticking up from there. So I'm going to cut those off so it's nice and flush, because you don't want to see that. See, so now it's a nice flush thing. Now we're going to take this and slip it right underneath the rails here. And that's it. Now we're going to continue down along, and we'll do all the rest of the sections of rail here, and we'll fill all of those in, and then this will be done. Okay, so all of those are in now. Only took me a couple minutes, but there we go. So those are all in on both rails. So all the ties have been replaced. You can see the darker ones are the ones that got put in there. And then on the angled pieces over here, so I put in a partial tie onto those because they go at an angle, so you can't fit a full tie across. So what I did, like right here, you can kind of see right there, tie starts out here and it just ends at the plate where the curve is. It doesn't look too bad. I think that'll work. And then you come down and they're all in place. There's the cars. Oh, it's right there. So there you go. That's all done.